There's no reason why that couldn't be your story.
You don't have an expiration date.
Ooh, I love that.
The actual pages. Like, that's all that matters at the end of the day.
This is the Authors and Agents podcast. Mackenzie, I'm super excited for you to be here with me today. I loved and devoured The Rosewood Hunt, which is your debut novel. So could you tell me more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Second, The Rosewood Hunt is a young adult thriller mystery, kind of in the vein of if a teen Knives Out met the show Outer Banks on Netflix. It's about a group of teens who, following the death of the main character Lily's grandmother, they realize her fortune has disappeared, and that they may or may not have been left clues scattered around their coastal town to hopefully find it. So it sets them off on an adventure where they have to reluctantly ally with each other, who they never really cared about beforehand, and try and follow these clues. But as they're hunting down the fortune, somebody starts hunting them, and it becomes a lot more intense and dangerous than I think anybody anticipated, making it a bit of a life or death endeavor.
Oh, I loved it. It was so great. And I think, I'm a very avid reader of this genre. And so I was like, as a reader, you always sit there and you're like, okay, can I guess what the twists are going to be, or who's it going to be, and there were some good surprises even for me as such a reader of this genre. So I loved it. And it was I think in my post about it, I said it was very Scooby-Doo, which it totally was. My son loves Scooby-Doo right now. And I was like, this is all the Scooby-Doo feels. That made me so excited.
I love it whenever I get little comments like that, or when people say it reminds them of the Goonies, which I know is a little bit more of a ways back, but I'm just yes. Success.
Yes. You're like, that's what I was going for.
Yeah.
So how exciting to have your debut novel come out into the world on Halloween, which is so fun. So tell me about your journey to this point to being published and having your book come out.
Yeah, so it feels, I guess, both long and not. I feel really fortunate that, The Rosewood Hunt is the book I'm debuting with. I keep telling people, I feel like this is the book I was always meant to debut with, but it's actually the 6th book I've ever written. So when I originally started pursuing traditional publishing, I was writing, I was, very firmly in fantasy. I was I'm going to be a fantasy author. It was pretty much all I read at the time as well. And I first started querying agents with a book I had been working on since high school. So it was one of those things where it had been in the works for years and years. I didn't really start taking it seriously until college, but still, all that time and effort were in there. And when I started querying it, I was getting pretty good responses, which was great, but nobody wanted to rep me, which should have been my first little indication, but I think that's pretty normal.
Right.
Especially with people's first books. I was learning the ropes of querying. I was learning so much at once. So the problem was I had written that book, and then I had written the next 2 books in that series.
Of course, that is that's a rookie mistake, isn't it?
I had to do it, and yeah. So there was a moment where I was just what do I do with this? But for me, traditional publishing was the only path I had ever really known or explored. So I was okay, I just need to try again. There are people, I've always been really inspired by anybody whose story is a bit longer, where they were oh, it took me 8 books to get here, or 10 books before I ever listed on the New York Times list, things like that. So I was all right, if it happens for other people eventually, there's no reason it can't eventually happen to me too. So I kind of started over, and what really helped is I started branching out from fantasy, and that's not saying people need to, but I think for so long I was only reading fantasy. And then I read One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus, which, as everyone knows, is a young adult thriller, and skyrocketed. And yeah, so good. And I just was wow, I never thought I could, I don't want to say I never thought I could read contemporary books or young adult thriller, but in the beginning, when I think you're so used to one thing, you just assume you're never going to be interested in something else. And it was so
Definitely.
eye-opening to me. And I was like, I want to write books like this. So I wrote my first young adult thriller, and I actually was chosen for a mentorship competition called Rev Pit. And that was really fun. And that competition is actually still going. I know, at least as of this past year, I know a lot of them have kind of shut down in recent
Yeah.
years. But thankfully, that one's still going. And it actually introduced me to my agent, Amy Bishop, at DG&B, Distal.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that book, we did edits, we went on sub, and then unfortunately that one didn't sell either. But it's okay, because while I was working on that one, I was basically taking all the feedback from it. And, some editors were really kind and would say, like, hey, we love this book, but, like, it doesn't fit anywhere. Or, like, we don't know where to put it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book that, like, there's no question where you would put it on a shelf. And I did with the Rosewood Hunt, and my sub experience was so different with that book because I wrote it, we did edits, and then it sold in its like first round to Harper Teen, and actually had 2 offers. So that was really cool.
That's so exciting. I think there's a couple great points from your story. I think too, like the first one is it's okay to have a love, right? Like a love of fantasy or a love of one genre,
Right.
but it's so important to read diversely in the publishing world because it helps you as a writer, but also like you said, it kind of opens your mind to be like, oh, I could write something different than just YA fantasy, which you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into just writing one thing, especially if you're not getting the kind of response that you want, right? And the second thing, I love that after you had, read more, you knew more about the publishing industry and like, okay, yeah, I'm still going to write something that I love and that I, is going to be fun for me to write, but I'm going to write it in a way that I know how they're going to market it, which is hard as a writer with something so creative. But when you're wanting to be traditionally published, you really do have to sort of shift a little bit to the business side of it and be like, okay, how are they going to sell this book that I'm writing?
Exactly. And I think the hardest part too for me is I was a communications and media major in college, so I took a lot of marketing classes. So when they would tell me things, I would be like, I know, but I just
Yeah.
didn't, you always hope you'll be that like one book where like the rules are
Yes.
off for you. But I
Of
was like,
course.
great, I guess not.
Guess not. I guess I have to follow the rules too.
Yeah.
So so lucky, and those programs, I wish there was more of them still, in existence, but that you got introduced to your agent through Rev Pit. So looking back on this experience and your querying experience before that too, like what would your top querying tip be for someone who's in that really horrible process right now?
I think for one, being really diligent of like the rules, something that I wish was more streamlined, but a lot of agents have different querying guidelines. And I feel like while I don't think it's necessary to be like super personalized in each query, because of course that's really time consuming, I do think just like following their rules already sets you kind of apart from a lot of people who don't. And, I think just showing you can like respect that and you're reading and you're doing your research, already I think that'll show that, you're somebody who's like willing to put in the work and, you're really paying attention to your stuff. And then I think my even bigger tip though is when I was querying my first book, you kind of hit a point where once you get turned down from all your, like main agents you query, sometimes you start, you're like, oh, maybe I missed an agent or, and maybe you did, but what I found myself doing is I was querying agents that I, in hindsight, knew I don't think would have been the best fit for me. But you just get like so desperate for someone to like tell you you wrote the book or tell you that like, potential as an author. And I guess I would just say, don't query anyone that you like don't genuinely want to work with because you're wasting your own time, you'll end up wasting their time, and then if they do end up like really liking your book and wanting to work with you, it just puts everybody in a weird position. So I know it's hard, but like stand firm and try it with the next one.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a hard spot to be in, to be like, okay, I've queried everybody I wanted to query, everybody passed, and now I need to shelve this book, right? Like that is such a hard thing to admit and a thing to do. But yeah, I mean, that's better than querying every agent in existence who you don't want to work with, or who is not the right fit for your book. But yeah, I mean, so it's so hard to shelve a book, but sometimes you got to, and you learn from all of them, like you did, learning from every single one you wrote. You got better each time.
Yeah, it was worth it. I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, I would hope so.
Yeah.
So my next question, my next question is a two-parter. I'd love to know, what's the hardest part of writing for you, and then so far, what's the hardest part of being an author?
So I feel like maybe it's just because I'm currently drafting, but I'm going to say drafting is the hardest part for me. I have like such a hard time I'm super visual, so everything I see is like a movie. And like when that movie isn't like translating to the page, which is what I'm dealing with right now, I'm just like, this is horrible. Like, I don't want to show anybody this. This book has like no potential. Like, yeah, and that's not saying I feel that way about my current book, but like just depends on the day. But it's really hard, I think, to kind of gather like morale when you're drafting and to feel confident that what you're working on is going to turn into, something that you do feel confident in, or something that hopefully catches the attention of publishers or agents or an audience wherever you are in the process. And currently I find it even more difficult because I have the Rosewood Hunt coming out, and that is like a polished book and people are reading it and thankfully telling me how much they enjoy it. And now I'm working on a new book, and it's like, oh my gosh, how will I ever write anything that like ever stands a chance against the Rosewood Hunt? But in reality, I know I will. Like I have before, I will again. Yeah. So I think drafting will probably be my worst. And then what was your second part again?
The hardest part of being an author so far.
I think planning events. I know this isn't a thing every author has to do, and actually it's not anything you really need to do, at least for me. Nobody was like, okay, you need to plan like this number of events, but I definitely went into being an author thinking like it would be easier, and it actually takes so much courage to like reach out to bookstores, introduce yourself, be like, hey, like, do you want to carry my book? And also, would you want to have an event about my book? And
just for me, and highlight me.
Right. And you'd be surprised, I think, or at least I was surprised, because I didn't really think about the business aspect of it before, which again is silly. Like I should have. But of course, bookstores, they have to act in their best interests as, will it be like a lucrative endeavor for them? And will they have enough support from their team to manage an event? It's all just business stuff. But from an author standpoint, I was just like starry-eyed, like, oh my God, this bookstore is so cute. I'd love to have an event here. Of like, how can I guarantee people will come? How can I guarantee people would buy my book, buy enough books to make it worth it? So that's something I've learned as a debut. I'm curious if it gets easier as you go along, just because you build up more books in your repertoire, you get to know more authors, more bookstores. But for now, that has probably been the hardest thing, because it just takes so much like courage and like setting like your ego aside.
What I love about that is I think sometimes when you're a little bit naive about the whole process, you think like, okay, querying is like the last hard step. As soon as I can get a literary agent, like it's golden rainbow sunshine from here, right? Yep. But there's editing, there's sub, and then there's your debut year. There's things like this, right, that you don't realize until you're like, wait, the hard part is not over.
Absolutely. I remember feeling that with when my first book was on sub. And I just was like, of course it's going to sell. Like, I did the hard part. I queried. I got an agent. Like, it's going to sell. And I got a great agent, too. Like, it wasn't, that wasn't a factor. And then kind of, like, the more time went by, I was like, oh. Like,
the panic was setting in. Like, oh, no, this is not going to work out.
Yeah, I was like, oh, my gosh, I guess I better start thinking of another book. And, I mean, I did, thankfully. But... yeah, it is just such a bizarre business.
It is such a bizarre business. Why did we want to be in this business? But it's worth it. It's worth it. That's what we keep telling ourselves.
It, it definitely is.
Yes. So
Always
let's
great.
flip this question. Yes. Instead of the hardest parts, what's the best part of being a writer and the best part of being an author?
The writer part is, I feel like regardless of if I ever, got a book deal, an agent, or even like started looking into publishing, I've always had so many stories in my head. Like I've always been a storyteller. So I think the fact that I've finally figured out a way to like laser shoot those stories like out of my head and onto a page, and even further, the fact that like now I'm in a position where I can share it with people, or, I'm starting to get my grounding sharing it with people. Like, that is so cool to me. I would have never expected that from, when I was in high school or even younger, when I would just, like, write stories everywhere. Or, like, my mom used to say I would just, like, babble, like, stories to myself in my car seat when I was super little and, like, sing little songs and stuff. So I feel like just the fact I am a writer and I get to share my work with people and like make friends about it and like get a community, like those are all my favorite parts of it. And then I think on the author side, like the fact that I'm now getting like messages from readers, or sometimes I'll see like a TikTok about my book made by somebody who read my book and it wasn't me.
So cool.
I do plenty
So
of them
cool.
myself, but seeing someone else do it. And, I've had a couple people who were like, some of them are really, lighthearted and they're like, I love this book. Like, it was so fun. It was such a great read. And I love those. And then equally love the ones where like, wow, this book like really like found me when I really needed it. Especially anyone struggling with like friendship or feeling like alone right now. And that is like the exact audience like I wanted this book to find. If it found anyone, I wanted it to be people who, feel a little alone in the world. And the fact that it is like so cool. So I'm so happy.
I love it. I can see the happiness all over you too. That's wonderful. So just to go back to a sore subject, drafting. When you're drafting, are you sore subject. Are you a pantser, or are you a planner, or what does that process look like for you?
It's so funny because I always thought I was like a type A plotter, like super detailed plots. I've always like religiously followed the Save the Cat like structure for books.
Yeah.
Which I do recommend like people read if you're looking to get into plotting. But what I've realized with like this newest book, it's been so interesting because my contract with HarperCollins was 2 books. I've basically been writing this book and like brainstorming this book with a team of people, which is so different from like usual. And even the Rosewood Hunt, I wrote that book when I was already agented, but it was like I just sent my agent a pitch and I was like, do you like this? And she was like, this sounds awesome, like run with it. And then, we went back and forth on a few things, but then I ran with it. And then we did edits after. With this new book, I've been sending pitches to my editor. We've been workshopping pitches. We've been deciding which ones like maybe don't go so well. And now we've finally landed on a pitch. And then, then it's about like writing kind of a synopsis or like a longer pitch. And
Right.
I realize there are some things I do figure out just like as I'm writing. And now that I'm in this position, I'm like, oh, like, wow, I never realized that, here I thought I was this like really good plotter. And now I'm like, wow, I actually figure a lot out as I go. But now I'm in a position where I do kind of need to figure it out up front, both for like me and my team and also just because of like deadline purposes. Like I don't have as much time as usual to like fix it later. So I guess I'm somewhere in the middle. Long story short, I'm a little bit of both.
Well, I think what's fun about this process and about writing in general is that you kind of learn and grow as you keep writing, right? Like it changes for you. And yeah, having a team of people write or help you, brainstorm the process is so different than before you were agented and you were just like, okay, I'm going to write a book and it's all on me. So
Right.
But I do think that the editors and our agents know, like, okay, if something might change during the process,
Right.
right?
Really?
Because I'm definitely not that person either who's like, okay, I'm going to outline and I'm going to think of all these ideas and then I'm going to stick to them exactly. Because like you, I find a lot of things out as I write, or
Mm-hmm.
things change. I'm like, oh no, that doesn't quite fit right. So,
Right.
yeah, but it's so different when you've got people waiting on you and needing to know what you're writing beforehand.
Right, right. And it's cool because something like I've talked to my editor a lot about it, of course, during this process. And I think I'm starting to finally understand like these specific things they do need to know, where like
Mm,
it's not everything, but it is like the end, the direction, the character arcs, So now I
yeah.
do feel again, I just feel like we're all like rookies in the beginning and you just like stumble through things as you go. And I am kind of looking forward to like later books and processes because I'm like, okay, like I think I finally am starting to
Yeah.
learn how this system works.
Right, yeah. So for your next book, you'll be like, okay, I have a better grasp of what you need from me beforehand.
Right.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
hopefully. So Mackenzie, I'd love for you to share something with me that your readers wouldn't necessarily know about you.
Hmm. Um, so I think something about storytelling is it comes in like a lot of forms. And before I really had like the bandwidth, I think, to write books, I would write songs. And it's like
Oh,
funny looking back at it and like thinking about it because I feel like my songs would be like so detailed, so long. And I felt like all of them were hinting at the fact that I need to go write a book because I would try to cram all
right.
these like different little scenarios into a
Yes,
song. But yeah, so I've probably written like a couple hundred songs and they just live in my notes app forever. But
I
I
love
just,
it. You have a couple hundred like short stories, basically.
yeah, exactly. And most of them were just, few were about real experiences, but most of them were kind of just about stories in my head, which checks out.
Yes, I love that. Hey, that's a good writing exercise though. Boiling down something to a very short form process is a good writing exercise. So you've always been practicing.
Exactly. Thank you. I like to think I've always been a writer. It just, takes different mediums.
Yes, definitely. So I've just got a couple questions left for you. They're fun questions. I'd love to know, I can already see a couple of them, but how many bookshelves do you have in your house?
Oh my gosh. So I actually just moved recently and I have this bookshelf and then I have a little bookshelf behind me. And if you can kind of see from this one, maybe not, but I already have books piling up and I actually have a stack of book packages that I have yet to open that have just been
That are
like
all
sitting
books.
in the corner. That are also all books. What's even funnier is two of my close friends just released their debuts. And I'm pretty sure the stack is all just their books that I pre-ordered multiple times. So I'm really excited to open them just because I think it'll be funny to be like, oh my gosh, another Together We Rot. Like, but yeah, so two officially. But someday I'm one of those people where I'm like, whatever like house I move into someday, I want a library so badly. It can be like
Oh
my
my
office,
gosh.
but I'm gonna call it the
Yes.
library.
I've seen some videos on Instagram. Like some lady built a library in her kitchen, which I actually love and adore the way it looked. But I
It
want
is
one of those big offices that has just like a wall full of bookshelves from ceiling to floor.
same.
Because that's what I need. I have three bookshelves, but they're all overflowing, and so then I
Yeah,
just have stacks of books everywhere. Yeah, I
yeah,
need more. I
that's
think we
amazing.
all need more though. It's a pretty typical problem of a reader.
Yeah, I feel like the worst part is like I'll like be getting more books, and I know I might not ever read them. Like I don't have time, or I as of right now, I kind of have to be selective in the books I read, whether I'm reading them to blurb because I started getting asked for blurbs, which is so cool, or
Oh,
I'm reading them because
so
it's like a
exciting.
friend of mine and I want to be able to like support on social media. But then there are so many books that just have pretty covers, or I want to support the author, or like XYZ. So I feel like I'm never gonna be one of those people who is like, oh yeah, I'll downsize my books, because I'm like, I might read
No.
it someday. I just love collecting them.
Yeah. Well, that's what books are for. That's what they're
Right.
for.
Exactly.
So, Mackenzie, I have one last question for you. It's easy. It sounds hard, but it's actually really easy. I'd love to know what your favorite book is right now. This is not your favorite book of all time, not the best book in the whole entire world, just something you've read recently that you want to tell people about.
Oh my gosh, this is such a good question. I always kick myself for like, not talking more about these books and like thinking about it in advance. So I actually read an arc of it. I'm actually not done with it, but I'm confident. And it's How to Find a Missing Girl by Victoria, I
Oh
think
yeah,
her
by Victoria.
Wolsock, maybe. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but I love it. I think she like encapsulates the teen voice so well. I love that we have like a sapphic detective agency going. I think it's perfect for anyone who like loved Holly Jackson's series of A Good Girl's
Yeah.
Guide to Murder, because I love any book that has like, you know, the same type of like podcasts and all these different mediums inside it. So, and that just came out. So I would definitely recommend any like mystery thriller lovers to check that out.
Yes, I think she my mouth is not working.
It's such a hard word to
I think
say.
she,
I have to
oh,
say
I
it
know.
slowly.
Well, I think that her voice is so distinctly, like teen, like she captures it so well because she is a teenager. I mean, she
Right.
wrote it when she was still in high school.
Right.
Senior year of or freshman year of college. She's so wonderful. I had her on the podcast a couple
Oh,
weeks ago, so
really?
that's definitely a good one to share. Yeah,
That's
she's
awesome.
so
Okay, I'm
fun.
so glad. But yeah, I feel like that's another reason I love it, is because like, I mean, I wasn't in high school that long ago, but it was long enough. But like when I read her books, I'm like, I just trust. I'm like, oh, this is what it's like now to be in high school. You know, it feels so
Yes.
real. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that one. And I'm glad that you are confident in it being wonderful even before you finished it completely. That's high praise.
Yeah. And if deadline hadn't gotten in the way, I would have been done.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, telling me all about the Rosewood Hunt, which everybody needs to go and make sure to pre-order. So on release day, it comes straight to your house because it's so, so wonderful. You're going to love it. And I'm excited to see what you do next.
Thank you. And I'm really excited too. And thank you so much for having me. I love this podcast. So I was so delighted when I saw your little email come through. I was like,